Pope Francis also calls us, as well as do the Gospels, to journey as one single human family toward unity, making the most of solidarity and dialogue among peoples in the multiplicity of differences. We at CRS believe in that because of the different countries that we work in and the diverse communities and cultures that we come encounter with. But again, Pope Francis acknowledges that himself and talks pretty much quite a bit about it in his latest apostolic exhortation. Speaking of his apostolic exhortation, I will be taking just a few of his quotes for our presentation today to kind of set the tone. But I also wanted to share with you some of the resources that I will be extracting information for our presentation today. The first thing that I wanted to say is that this is really an introduction and really the tip of the iceberg of some of the findings that we found in our research, in the research at the Bishops' Conference. And there's quite a bit more that you can do as far as training, but we acknowledge that within an hour and 20-minute time frame, it's very difficult to cover everything. So we will focus on I'll share with you an agenda in a second, but I wanted to share with you the resources that we will be focusing on. The first one that I wanted to share with you was the apostolic exhortation itself. So if you haven't read that, I invite you to do so. There is a whole section on pastoral ministry that I think you will find very helpful. The other document that we and I have been doing a lot of work with is the Fifth General Conference documents of the bishops of CELAM, the bishops of Latin America and the Caribbean. This is referred to as Aparecida, for those of you who are familiar with these documents. Cardinal Bergoglio, who Pope Francis is one of the authors of these documents, and it's really shaped his papacy already. So I'd invite you to take a look at this as well. It talks a lot about accompaniment. It talks a lot about us becoming missionary disciples, not just at a global level, but at a local level.
And the name of that?
This one is called Aparecida. You can look up Aparecida. It's Aparecida. And there's no actually I should.
Is it in the bibliography that's in our
Yes, I will give you at the end of the session a list of resources, and within those resources you'll find that document. So there's really no need to write it down. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that. The other book that I wanted to refer to, which I think I left in the back of the room there, or it might have disappeared. This one is called Building Intercultural Competence for Ministers, which is a workshop that was developed by the Secretariat for Cultural Diversity. This came out of their conference that they had in 2010. It's only been a couple of years published now, and they provide trainings at the diocesan level. There was one here in the Northwest that was held last July, I want to say, in Seattle. And there were quite a number of people who attended, but I would invite those of you who would like to look at this material at the end of our session, feel free to browse it over. And I can get you contact information for training if you would like that, either at your parish or at your diocese.
Hey, where's the book available, Jesus?
The book of what?
Where is it available?
It's available at the USCCB website in their resource library.
Okay.
You can order it through them as well. There is one other book that seems to have disappeared. No, that's not it. It's Shared Parishes and Intercultural Sensitivity, and Best Practices for Shared Parishes. And I will be taking a lot of that information, actually, particularly from Chapter 1, into our conversation today. And I've this actually book has been published for only about 2 months now. It's very new, and it would serve you all, I would imagine, just based upon the fact that you're here in this session. I found it very helpful in the research that I was doing. And again, a lot of what I will share with you today is based from this book. I've actually talked to the Bishops' Conference and they've given me the okay to reproduce chapter 1 and a few of those pages for you, and you will get that at the end of the session today. And that will give you some information for you to read at your leisure after our session today. And then if you would like to order the resource yourself or contact them for further training, or myself as well. Great. So today's agenda real quickly. What I wanted to cover is the concept of shared parishes, and also what is your reality within the context of shared parishes. Our call to be missionary disciples. I made mention of that earlier. 6 stages of intercultural sensitivity. These stages are very helpful for us on an individual basis, but also within the context of our parishes and our communities, to know exactly where we're at and where we would like to be. Parish best practices. So one of the things that I would like to offer to you, if we have the time, is to share a few of the stories from the trenches or the field from other parts of the country that have been dealing with some of the similar issues that you might be dealing with. But most importantly, to really spend some time in a guided group discussion and to hear some of your best practices. So not just to hear the challenges, but to hear some of the wonderful things that are happening within your own parish. The one other thing that I want to say is that my experience is within the context of Hispanic ministry. And when we talk about diverse Catholic communities, there are a number of them within our country, within our communities. So please just use whatever community that you're thinking of. Whenever I say Hispanic ministry, if I refer to Hispanic ministry, to use whatever community that is in your parish. So shared parish. What is a shared parish? Very simple. Shared parishes describe parish communities in which 2 or more languages or cultural contexts are an integral part of the ministerial life and mission of a particular parish. Pretty straightforward. One of the reasons why we wanted to have a clear understanding and a term for this is that we feel as though if there's a common language at a national level, then people will be able to have a better understanding of the communities that you have. Plus, the most important thing that we found and that we would like to move towards is this sense of stewardship, is this sense of a parish feeling fully integrated. And what that means is basically not only sharing space, but sharing the many resources that you might have in your parish. And also sharing the many resources that a certain individual or a community can offer to the parish and to the community. And that doesn't necessarily mean monetary stewardship. It's time, it's talent, and it's treasure, but mostly time and talent. So, just a few statistics. Today, over 33% of our parishes throughout the country are shared parishes, which is a pretty significant number. And actually, this is a very conservative number. Most folks feel as though it's more like 35, closer to 40%. This is a huge contrast to what was the number in 2000, and that was at 22%.
14 years.
Yeah, 14 years, it's grown 10%. And just based on that, we feel as though this is going to grow quite significantly. And several factors for that. We'll go over the stages in a little bit, but a couple of them are one, denial, which is the first stage. And so there are many parishes that are still in that stage where they're not even counting the different communities within their parish yet because they're not even aware of them yet. So we're expecting this number to grow. Exactly, or pushing them away. So, a really quick overview of shared parishes. I wanted to spend a few minutes, if we could. We'll do about 10 minutes, and what we'll do is we'll split up into groups of 4, so please keep it to 4. And again, we'll spend 10 minutes, and these are the 2 questions that I would like you to stay on track on with. So basically, has your parish experienced a significant demographic shift in the past few years? And if so, how has your parish responded to this population shift? Wonderful. So why don't we really quickly, I hope that there was a few note takers or a note taker from each group. If you could just share one or two findings as far as how either challenge or best practice that your parish has responded with the certain demographic shift that's happened in your parish. So why don't we start with this group here, and then we'll work our way around.
Well, we talked about 3 different parishes. St. Henry's in Gresham, which I knew from having used their facilities to do various things when I worked for Catholic Charities. But St. Henry's, and I was always kind of shocked, has no Spanish Mass. They do now, kind of, but St. Anne's has the Spanish Masses. St. Patrick's in Northwest Portland, that Lois and I attend, was actually way ahead of the trend. They started a Spanish Mass 30 years ago. I don't know why they started a Spanish Mass, because there's no Latino community around the church. But they did. It was very successful then, and it's even more successful now. But we still have, and there is, we have Spanish-speaking members on the parish council and so forth. But there's still a long way to go in terms of making the 2 communities fit together. And then we talked about St. Lucas in Woodburn, and they have 2 English Masses, 2 Spanish Masses, and it sounds like the communities probably work more closely together then. So it's kind of St. Henry's, then you got St. Patrick's in the middle, and then St. Lucas, would be perhaps the model, I guess.
Sure. Okay. Great. Thank you.
So mostly you want to say 3 different models, 3 different parish models?
3 different
there?
parish models is fine, yeah.
And they're all 3 at different phases in the goal to, what's the word?
Shared parishes.
Yeah, shared parishes.
Okay.
So why don't we move on to the next group?
We talked about the different groups in the church, and they're not really going together. They're kind of splitting, and some of the Caucasians are leaving the one parish, going other parishes because they don't feel they fit in. And we were talking about how do you help them to become unified?
Okay.
We also talked about the split is perhaps our fault because we don't encourage bilingual masses and the mingling of the 2 cultures.
Wow.
If we had more mingling, we wouldn't be so split.
Okay.
Perhaps
So
there
things
was
together.
a split. Your point was
there's a white exodus, I heard that.
right exodus.
Yeah. And then how do you get them together? You have bilingual masses rather than different masses for like the Hispanics have one mass, the Anglo people have another mass.
So how to build bilingual masses?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That would be on here?
how to build them together.
Right. How to build, or the reality is that there's just 2 different masses going on, 2 different communities. Great. Thank you. Next group.
Well, help me out, group. We all had very different experiences. St. Francis in Sherwood, St. Joseph in Vancouver, St. Clair, and St. Charles. And I attend St. Charles. I feel like I call it the United Nations Parish. It's very multicultural. We don't have separate masses. I didn't say this, but Pentecost or just recently we had the prayers of the people in 12 different languages, and it's just beautiful. The problem is the leadership. The leadership positions tend to be people in the dominant culture, and we've got to wrestle with that and figure out how to bring and share and be more fully integrated. So you want to?
Muy bien.
I think that one thing common
Yes.
among us is that we don't, most of the people who are in our parishes are really English speaking.
Mm-hmm.
And so that whole issue of bilingual masses is not an issue, but it's integration of cultures. So
That's a good point. So it's not a linguistic issue.
yeah.
It's more an issue of integrating the cultures
Yeah,
together.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because we just got a new priest who's Filipino, and so now we have Filipinos come to our parish because he is there.
Right. Great. Wonderful. let's move in the back there and move our way up.
Okay, well, we found that half of us have just an English-speaking parish and haven't had the experience of the diversity, but the exciting part is the other half. St. Anthony's, a third Caucasian, a third Vietnamese, and a third Hispanic.
Wow.
They have separate masses, and there's quite a diverse social economic stratus. And then St. Francis, no, St. Peter, excuse me, is 70% Spanish.
Okay. So diverse social economic.
And a dialogue with social economic, okay?
And then I wrote multicultural. Okay, the English speaking was very multicultural. There's between Chinese and Vietnamese and
Chinese, Vietnamese, Filipinos, African Americans. So the English speakers are 30%, but of those, only probably about 70% of them are actual Anglos.
I see.
And so, but the biggest shift for us was we went from years of having an Anglo priest who could speak Spanish to now we have a Spanish priest who speaks English, and the whole community is shaking. I mean, the English-speaking community.
Yeah.
That's a huge shift.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
'Cause
And we'll talk a little
yeah.
bit about that, the uncomfortableness of the transition. that
Well, there's
happens.
grammar and word pronunciation, and they want to fix the bulletin all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All makes sense, sure. Last group? I'm sorry, were you done?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, last group. In the 4 parishes, there were 4 real kind of different scenarios. Parish at the coast has a Hispanic mass and has mostly Hispanic diversity, right?
Oh, yeah.
My church, I'm at Christ the King, which is East Portland, and we have a big Asian influence. We have a big Filipino community, we have some Vietnamese, we have some Chinese. There's also some Hispanic, but they are a small segment in our parish. And then St. Cecilia's is very diverse. They have not just a separate Spanish Mass, they have 2 separate Spanish Masses. They have a separate priest who comes in to serve the Spanish Mass, which I thought was really interesting. They've also hired on staff a deacon to serve that community and a parish office staff person who is bilingual, so that, but she said there's no unity in the parish. It's a very separate.
Split.
Parallel.
Yeah. Got it.
And our Filipino community, we have an intercultural committee in our church. And we do a Pentecost celebration because Pentecost is really the birth of the international church. If you think about it, it's the speaking of tongues and everybody could hear. And so Pentecost is always our big intercultural fair, and everybody brings food from all the different cultures and they all eat together. And we bring in entertainment. So in that, there's a sharing of culture in that setting, but there's not a lot of blended community. There is a sharing of cultures.
Got it. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay,
These are all,
anything you need?
yeah, that's fine the way it is. Great. I mean, these are all just wonderful challenges that come, well, not one, they're challenges that are not wonderful, but they're there. And it's important for us to name them. But there's also some best practices that are happening around in different parishes. I really love the example of the Pentecost. Again, I think that's a great step forward. But it's very important for us as individuals and within our parish social ministry groups and within our parishes themselves to identify what the issues are within your own parish, to name them as a community. and to also challenge your leadership, your pastors, and so on and so forth, to address these different issues. And if there are issues of, your parishioners who feel excluded or feel as though something is not addressed, it's important for you all, for us, to voice those opinions and to make sure that they are being seen and they are being addressed. Yes?
I just realized I missed a big chunk of what our parish also does. We have maybe 3 black families, maybe. They are recent immigrants, and
Okay.
our church has started an orphanage in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Okay.
And we built a parish school, or an orphanage school, and now a secondary school. So our parish supports that.
That's wonderful, because that's an example of not just a shared parish locally, but it's a shared parish globally. You have a sister parish, in other words. You have a partnership.
Let's
Which I think is
get,
wonderful. And I know many parishes do that as well. So are you saying that it kind of came out of the 3 African
our
families?
deacon is working with this
see.
African family.
Wonderful. And they are from the DRC?
Mhm.
Wonderful. Great, thank you. Let's move on. So, again, I'm sorry to rush through many of these areas, but we do only have an hour and 20 minutes. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about is this call to become missionary disciples, which I think is a very interesting call, and I think it's a blessing for all of us. Because missionary disciples, or missionary in general, has often had a connotation of going overseas or going somewhere else and being of service and providing ministry and kind of evangelizing, sharing the Gospels. And it still is that. Missionary disciples still joyfully announce the gospel and proclaim the love of God that transforms hearts and minds, as well as unjust structures that perpetuate poverty and suffering and preserve the human dignity of all. But it's much more than that. I mean, it's not just a global or an international missionary that we're looking at. It's within our own local parishes. It's within our own parish that we need to also build missionaries and have that zeal to share the joy of the gospel, as Pope Francis has called us to do. Calling to mind what Archbishop Sample had mentioned yesterday as well, that Eucharist is primary. It's the source and summit of our faith, as I mentioned earlier. We have to ensure that everyone is at the table on Sunday, and we provide that space. If you know that within your community there's a certain group, whether it be a Korean group, a small family, that is striving to have a community and would love to worship in their own language, in their own cultural way, that we provide that space for them eventually. Find ways to do that. If not, we will continue to have these parallel churches that only divide us, that only cause more division, as I said, and it also causes kind of a loss of faith. It loses tradition that can be handed down to children. Folks who are immigrants really come here out of a need, and they want to preserve their cultural traditions in many ways, and want to pass along their faith. But we all know the issues and how hard it is for our children to continue to be Catholic in such a secular world that we live in here in the United States. So many times our children, or even those who are immigrants, become unchurched. And so they'll go on to other denominations, and or they'll just leave the faith in general. And that's certainly something that we don't want to do if we're called to become missionary disciples, if we're called to spread the gospel and to bring more people to our faith. Pope Francis offers a challenge and a dream. His dream is of a missionary option, that is a missionary impulse capable of transforming everything so that the church's customs, ways of doing things, times and schedules, language and structures can be suitably channeled for the evangelization of today's world rather than of her self-preservation.
Yay.
That is powerful.
Powerful. Boy,
I mean-
do we need it.
Exactly. And so, in other words, we're not building church so that people can come to the church. We're asking church to go out to the world, and for us to learn from the world, so that we can develop ourselves and develop a new church.
And I like in that his phrasing there is really good. It can be suitably channeled to address today's world.
Amen.
Because so many people are so afraid of changing the tradition of the church.
Right.
Panic. But if it doesn't relate to the people sitting in the pews,
Yeah. But it's also important to maintain our tradition.
but not be
do-
stuck in it.
Exactly. Yes. Good point. I'm sorry, I would have gone back to the slide, but my reverse button isn't working. So three very important things that we should keep in mind are these three very things, and that's to welcome the stranger. What we would like to do is to continuously invite people to be part of our church, not just globally, not just in the construct of we want you to become Catholic, but to our parishes. Open the doors, allow people to be part of your communities, and continuously invite them and invite them and invite them. And if it means that we need to change, I know it's very hard, and it's something that's very difficult for some parishes to do, but it's something that needs to happen. Building relationships through accompaniment is something that we're asked and we're called to do as well.
Talk about that.
Yeah. So, when we invite people, we don't just want them to show up, to church and we put that on a checklist. We want to make sure we know who they are, what their issues are. We want to also know what our neighbors, even if they're not Catholic, we want to know what's going on. Pope Francis, I forget, the person from Catholic Charities just talked about Pope Francis's, nightly visits to the poor. I mean, that's a great example. I mean, he's accompanying people. He talks.
He's actually said that that's an urban myth.
Is that right? Well,
This is
well. So, but he has talked about and shared with his brother bishops and the rest of the clergy that what he desires and what he hopes, as Jesus has, is that they have this olor de oveja, so odor of sheep. In other words, he wants his pastors to be with his flock, to walk with them, to work with them.
I think that the Catholic Church has a real advantage though, because if you are here in Oregon or you're in New York, you're going to hear the same gospel and have the same liturgy everywhere. So like when I was in Colorado and my sister was here, we could talk on the phone and say, what did your pastor talk about on this same subject? And the Protestants, they never know what they're going to talk about or what they're going to do. And I think it's a really binding thing
Absolutely.
for us to have the liturgy worldwide.
Absolutely. We were just in Ghana the other day, and the gospel they're preaching or reading there is the same gospel we're reading every Sunday, and that's happening throughout the world. It's a good point. So accompaniment is huge. Allowing ownership through inclusion. I mentioned stewardship earlier, and eventually that's what we want to develop, is good stewards within our parishes. And the only way we could do that is to allow people, for them to have this understanding that they have ownership of the parish. Just sharing those resources. And also inviting them to share what they have to offer. Their time and talent and their treasures. This can be a very difficult thing to do. I mean, what we just talked about, just the concept of transition of this type of a parish is very, very, it could be very disheartening for people. It could cause a lot of issues for folks. transitioning from a culturally homogenous parish to a shared parish can cause a sense of uncertainty, fear of the unknown, a sense of scarcity. In other words, the resources that we have are limited, and how is it that we can't share them? Limited cultural competence, and this often happens with communities that do want to maybe involve other communities that are present in their parish, but they just don't know how, and they just need a little direction. And the last point is, that most folks, and we hear this all the time, why can't they just be like us? Why can't they just speak English? This whole issue of assimilation is very predominant in the American culture. And I hate, the reality is that is not a Catholic teaching or a Catholic perspective. That's something that we need to really challenge as American Catholics. Are we Catholics first, or are we Americans first? And that's something that's very hard for individuals or even the larger community to really kind of deal with. Yes, Jeff.
Hey, Jesus, I wasn't going to bring this up, but Welcoming the Stranger was the title of a document and a campaign that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops had put together about a decade ago, and it still continues, and moving towards some sort of legalization for undocumented immigrants. And I think that they've been out ahead of it, but I have found across the board that parishes are very, very timid about that issue. I don't think I've ever heard it from the pulpit, and never directly. And I think it's something, like you're saying, it's kind of aligns with this desire to assimilate like us, that people may think it, but they won't articulate it, and that includes, most of our pastors.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And again, I think it's important to name these issues and just call them as they are. And it's very difficult to talk about in our own parishes, but they're very important issues that we need to really, if we want to advance our parishes and build community, we need to really talk about them. If it's okay, I'm going to just move on because we're really late on time, and I want to press forward here. So the challenge, what is the challenge for us as Catholics? And again, Pope Francis calls us as pastoral ministers to seek and to abandon the complacent attitude that says we have always done it this way. Why should we change now? Yeah. I invite everyone to be bold and creative in this task to rethink the goals, structures, styles, and methods of evangelization in their respective communities. So not just abroad, not just what you're preaching, at another community, particularly for us, those who work for CRS, but within your own respective communities, and I think that's pretty. That's important. And the other thing is, the important thing is not to walk alone, but to rely on each other as brothers and sisters. Profound, and especially under the leadership of the bishops and a wise and realistic pastoral discernment. In other words, we're not, as opposed to our culture here, which is very individualistic. Our journey is not just as individuals. It's in communion with our neighbors, with our parish community. And the good of our brothers and sisters here is the good of ourselves. So 6 stages of intercultural sensitivity. I'll go through these really quickly, and I do have a little time to go over these a little more in detail. But Dr. Milton Bennett is a consultant. He actually resides here in Portland. Many of you may have heard of him. But he has 6 stages of intercultural sensitivity, which we're really focusing on and would like to share this, and really has been a big part of chapter 1 in the book that I'm going to share with you. And those 6 stages of intercultural sensitivity are denial, defense, minimizing, acceptance, adaptation, and integration, all in sequential order in many ways. So really, the ideal and the goal is to get to fully integrated parishes. So stage 1, as an example, Denial may persist on the part of the pastor and or staff, who may argue that these people are just passing through, that they are not necessarily even Catholic, or that they may be illegals, as Jeff has pointed out. In the denial stage, people tend not to see the other or to consider the other as somebody else's responsibility. That's denial. And oftentimes denial happens pretty regularly. I mean, there's San Bernardino, the Diocese of San Bernardino has a large immigrant population that's living out in areas where people can't even see them. And when the pastor, even the bishop, found out that they were residing there, then they moved and mobilized and developed a mass for them and developed service for them. And it was actually a wonderful way, and they actually have their own little chapel now out in the area where they live. 2, defense. Once the pastor and his staff have become aware of the presence of a community of Catholics who are not being reached out or included, there is a tendency to rationalize why these people are not included. Reasons given may include some of the following arguments, and we talked a little about them. We have no more room in this parish. We're at our maximum capacity. They can't be trusted, or can they be trusted? They are going to take over. They are not like us, which is another part of the assimilation factor. My grandparents built this parish. They should go to the next parish. In other words, it's not my responsibility. It's someone else's responsibility. So these reasons are often motivated by fear of the unknown. And it's a very normal reaction. And I think that's very important to state and suggest that although our ideal is to be here, the reality is that many parishes are in these 3 areas here. And I don't want to say that it's, complete and negative. It's just what it is. And we need to help the transition to move to these areas where people are feeling a little more included. Number 3, minimizing. The pastor and his team are aware of a significant number of Hispanic families or any other family growing and living in their parish boundaries, and they recognize that it is the parish's responsibility to respond. However, there is a move to minimize differences in order to change the way things are done in the parish. For instance, arguments in this stage usually go something like this. They can participate if they want to. The door is wide open, or they live in America now and they should learn English and assimilate like everybody else. This response begins to show a degree of openness to welcoming people, but only as long as things don't change in our parish and they leave their culture, traditions, and expectations at the door. The expression colorblind fits here, and in the literal sense, as people choose not to see the differences with the other. However, the intent is to justify not having to do anything different, but waiting for the other to fit into our way of thinking and or our way of doing things. Establishing the Sunday liturgy in Spanish or any other language is considered unnecessary and can even be considered divisive. This stage is particularly difficult to overcome when it comes to faith formation of children and young people of new immigrant populations. The fact that children of immigrants know English or in the process of learning it leaves significant differences out of the equation, such as culture, race, educational attainment, economic and social status, and immigration status, among others. Stage 4, acceptance. In this stage, the pastor and staff recognize differences as quite real and know that the same behavior may mean different things for people of different cultures. There is a willingness to shift perspective while still maintaining a commitment to our own values. Establishing the Sunday liturgy in Spanish may be fine if they don't disturb others and take good care of our things. In this stage, the well-established community and the new immigrant community may share the same buildings, parking lot, and the church building, but at different times, avoiding each other at all costs.
Well, how is that acceptable? Well, you move them
Well,
one step
okay.
further.
A sacramental minister from another parish is likely to preside at the Sunday liturgy in Spanish with very little contact with the pastor and his staff. There is a sense of treating each other politely, but the us-them language prevails. Stage 5, adaptation. In the adaptation stage, the pastor and his staff are able to understand and empathize with different perspectives and adapt their behavior accordingly. The pastor, his staff, and the leadership of the immigrant community have developed significant intercultural competencies, such as the ability to communicate in 2 languages, establishing interpersonal relationships across cultures, and openness to new ideas and projects originating in either community. There is a sense that both communities belong together in the parish, and that people are more willing to relate, work, and collaborate with one another. The we language is used among the leadership in both communities. There are a variety of programs and projects available in both languages, and changes have been made to accommodate the needs of the Hispanic community and or other community within certain limits. Moving the Sunday liturgy in Spanish to a better time or allowing fundraising activities for specific Hispanic programs and activities are significant changes in parish life. However, at this stage, there is still not a great deal of participation by the immigrant community in decision-making bodies like the parish council, the finance council, or the staff in general. Stage 6, integration. At this stage, the pastor, his team, and the leadership of the Hispanic community or any other community move quite naturally from one cultural framework to the other, adapting to different situations with ease and cultural accuracy. The leadership in both cultural communities has a sense of ownership of the parish or in the parish. There is a good representation of both cultures in all decision-making bodies and in the parish staff, and resources are generated and shared according to the needs and aspirations of both communities in the parish. All become good stewards to the larger parish community by sharing their time and talent, resources to serve each other. So those are the different stages, and actually that Milton Bennett has come up with. And in the resource page that I will give you, there is a link to his findings that kind of go over this in a more secular way. I kind of referred to them with an example of a parish or at the parochial level, but it gives you an idea, a kind of foundation for you to understand where your parish is or where you may be as well. So at this time, we're running out of time. So why don't we do one more small group reflection? And one of the question is based on the stages that we just went over. So considering the demographics and the population shift that you all discussed in your earlier conversation, what stage of intercultural sensitivity best describes where you and or members of your staff are on at this continuum, or in your parish? I really just wanted you all to have an opportunity to take some time and reflect and see where you are in these stages and or where your parish is. It's always good to name it and to articulate it. So I invite you to use this exercise as well within your parishes. If you are part of the parish council or part of your parish social ministry committee, feel free to use that. So moving on, the 3 areas of intercultural competence: knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Developing intercultural sensitivity requires the acquisition of intercultural competence for ministry. Intercultural competence is the capacity to communicate, relate, and work across cultural boundaries. It involves developing capacity in 3 areas. The 3 areas that you see here: knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Knowledge involves the capacity to understand more than one perspective on how things are done. Knowing how different cultures communicate, knowing how different cultural communities make decisions, how they use time during their meetings, how far ahead they plan, how they raise funds for the parish, how they go about preparing and celebrating the liturgy, etc., allows the intercultural minister to facilitate communication, organization, and implementation of common parish activities. Knowledge favors the both and approach over the one-size-fits-all approach. So the more you know, the better off you'll be. The better you can plan ahead. And again, we find that this is key, and you can have knowledge without a certain attitude, especially from your leadership. If your parish leadership is open, you'll be able to accomplish more knowledge and to develop more intercultural capacity. Skills. Skills include the ability to communicate in more than one language, to empathize with parishioners from different cultures and lived realities, to be a good listener, and to motivate people to actively engage in the various ministries of the parish. They also include the capacity to facilitate meetings, conduct trainings, coordinate volunteers, deal with conflict, and provide support to leaders from different cultures. Skills makes of the minister an intercultural mentor who knows how to plan with people, not for people. Attitudes. Attitudes include openness to engage parishioners from different cultures with a sense of gratitude and curiosity. It makes people feel at home and is effective in building relationships across that lead to mutual acceptance, appreciation, and collaboration. Attitudes describe a minister as a bridge builder who brings people together and invites their uniqueness gifts for the good of all and the common mission of the parish, which goes back and reverts back to what we were talking about, the stewardship, ensuring that we're serving, that we're providing our time and talent to serve all of those folks in the parish. So those are the three areas of intercultural competence. You'll have all this part of your Chapter 1 handout that I'll be providing you. So why don't we move on from since we're running out of time, we have about 7 minutes. And I just want to conclude with going back to what we had brought up before, our call to become missionary disciples and the challenge that Pope Francis and the Church gives us in general. As pastoral ministers, we should seek to abandon the complacent attitude that says that we have always done it this way. We need to find bold and creative ways to rethink the goals and structures of our parishes, the style and methods of evangelization, as it's said here in your respective communities, and as I'd mentioned, your parishes. The important thing is not to walk alone, but to rely on each other as brothers and sisters, walking together, dealing with these issues, talking about them, working them out. Dialogue is a key. One other thing that, actually going back to what we had talked about before, the three things that we're inviting you to do in your parishes is to welcome the stranger, to evangelize, to share the gospel, to invite them to parish, to your Mass, and to build relationships through accompaniment. And also, eventually, to allow ownership through inclusion. This last goal would be your ultimate goal, and it may take some time. If you could do it within a year or two, wonderful. If not, we also understand that it's a process, especially within that the stages that we had mentioned before. So your homework, your task, you may ask, you have homework, is to do that, welcome a stranger. And you could start off by just going to Mass on Sunday and looking around, panning around during Mass or after Mass, and someone that you have not come into contact with. I mean, I'm sure your parishes are fairly large. There may be one or two that are a little smaller, but, have a conversation with them. Maybe even invite them, and I would even push you to invite them to break bread with you. Either have coffee with them someplace or invite them over to your house. And even, share some of the information I shared with you and see what kind of feedback you get from them. But, just the opportunity to meet with someone different from your parish to expand your horizon or your relationships with people in your parish will allow you to start moving in that direction of inviting people that may not be part of your parish. Yes.
I wanted to just share one I thought was very skillful thing the pastor did when they got a letter from the Archdiocese saying that they should talk this weekend about immigration issues. So what Father Raoul did was, to the English Mass, was he reminded them who they were. And he says, all right, we've been a parish for 100 years. Remember when your grandparents came all from Germany, and then we were the first parish that housed the deaf mass, and then when that community grew too large, then we also were the site for the mass for the disabled, and says, and now you've opened your arms again to welcome the Mexicans. And so by showing them who they were, it helped see how they had always done that. And then he grounded it in the Old Testament of saying we're supposed to, it's the widows, orphans, and aliens. It's aliens.
Yeah.
So I thought he was so good on that.
Thank you, and I think that's a very good point. I think as Catholics we should be very proud of our church and how far we've gotten and all the wonderful things that we do as church. And I think that's one thing that we really need to celebrate as community. That's not to say, there's always room for development, and I think that's what we're called to do. So thank you for bringing that up. It's very important to acknowledge and to recognize our history and the wonderful things that we've done. So I encourage you as part of your homework to invite someone and to really develop a relationship with them. And eventually you can grow on and maybe do one person a month. It's the old way of community organizing as well. Get to know one person on a one-on-one basis. Yes.
Actually, I gave the other this my session this
Yes.
morning. I said,
Meet a stranger once a week, every Sunday. So
There you
that's
go.
52 people.
All right,
Raise
there we
the bar.
go. There you go. There's a challenge from Pia. Let's do that one more time. Go into your small groups. And what we want to focus now on is your best practice. Some of you have shared that in the first and the the second one, it was more challenges. But what are some of your best practices that you could share with the rest of your group there in your committee and the rest of us at large? So why don't we just take one or two things, very quick bullets, of some shared best practices from each one of your groups. Sorry?
oh, good, from each group.
Yes.
So we can hear them all.
Yes. You want to? Yeah, please. And go ahead and do your group too.
We sort of had a dearth of best practices. However, I think one thing that was said is one place where we see people coming together is RCIA classes and confirmation classes. The kids have to come to confirmation and they begin to blend and know each other, and the people in RCIA begin to blend and know each other, and it's one way to get people talking to each other. And I think for our parish, it's sharing culture. We're not integrating yet, but at least we're at this point where we're sharing with each other, and we have the Guadalupe Mass and we have the Pentecost service, and we're baby steps. Baby steps.
Absolutely.
So,
And she said welcoming too, like welcoming
yeah.
committee or welcoming group or something like that. That sometimes even within one's own culture, there's not that much
Yeah.
recognition of the other as far as going across the aisle, or it's like just people to people in general.
Yeah, in many ways, just training your ushers to develop and to build that kind of sense of welcoming.
I had to train myself. I don't know if you got the ushers to do. Still get used to people, concept, approach.
Thank you. Next group.
Well, at our parish, what we did this year for the first time ever, we had a single First Communion class. So before, the English were on one day, the Spanish were the other. So now everybody's in the same book, so it's English one page, Spanish the other page. The kids get to self-select if they want an English class or a Spanish class. Each class has an assistant who speaks the other language. And then instead of separate First Communion masses, there's 3 of them, and they can just choose whichever mass they want, because all 3 will be bilingual. So that was a huge plus. And then in my old parish, which was all English speaking, we adopted the theme of solidarity. And so we did the prayers of the faithful. We took the whole world, the countries of the world, and we prayed for 3 countries every week. And it changed, so we had the whole world done within a year. And we had a map during coffee and donuts and moved the push pins around every week.
That's a cool idea.
So it was simple because we were all English.
That's great.
That's a cool idea.
So global map, or,
What's your favorite?
Global prayers of the faithful. Yeah.
wonderful. Anything else from that group? Good? Thank you. Let's move over this way.
So when you have a team or bring a committee together, try to invite the ethnicities within your parish to be part of the leadership teams. So you have their insights and their wisdom to share as you model, hopefully, what you're going to be able to scale to the rest of the parish.
Great point. Well done. Get that in there?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. And, you know, part of that as well is identifying leadership. And, you know, oftentimes as parish leaders, you know, we think, oh, well, I like that person. Let's just go with him or her. You know, you need to also consider who the leaders are in that community, who the community has appointed as their leader. Who are they going to all the time as a mentor or as someone that is a spokesperson or advocate for that group? So consider that as well. I think that's something that we should all consider. Next group.
At our parish, we have RCIA also is a real building block. And our RCIA group needed money for their materials. So the Vietnamese community made up sack lunches with a sandwich and a cookie and a drink and sold them for $5 a piece. And the name of this sandwich was whatever it was. And some of us were thinking, oh my goodness, I hope they buy these lunches. But they sold them all, and it was real intercultural that they would support this, typically not knowing exactly what they were eating.
Yeah.
But it was really good, and it went over very well. And we also have Name Tag Sunday once a month to introduce.
That's great. That's a great idea. That and you know we've mentioned meal a couple of times or food a couple of times, but you can never go wrong with breaking bread. And the more intercultural, the better. Learning someone's meals, their you know what their favorite dishes are, their traditional dishes are, is another way to build community. So I would emphasize that as well. Thank you. Last group.
Well, I just thought of this
Yes.
just now while we were talking. Each month have a different nationality that is, or culture that is present in your parish, and concentrate your activities that month on Hispanic, for example. For coffee and donuts, have it more Hispanic oriented. And different activities, put a cultural bent on it, but a different one each month.
Absolutely. Great. Great
Can I
point.
say one thing? Is
Yes.
For Christmas, my kids gave me DNA, you know, where I had my DNA
Oh
done.
yeah, sure.
And if you believe it or not, I'm African American, European Jew. I mean, only 3%, but what I'm saying is we're all the same, really. Yeah, so I mean, yeah.
We are one human family.
We are. Yeah, we really are.
That's a good way to wrap things up. I do just want to emphasize our homework, so please take that seriously. I know Pia suggested to do it once a week. If you can, that would be ideal. It's a great exercise. And please, just remember our call to become missionary disciples within our own communities. Thank you. It's so important for us to really take that seriously. Read the joy of the Gospels. And the last thing before we wrap up, let's do our prayer one more time. And so we'll put ourselves in the presence of the Lord. Creator of all races and ethnicities, help us to see that a diverse community is the way. And to guide us to see that entering into a vital with others who are different from us is the way to make ourselves whole. Guard us from fear of the other, from fear that our own security is threatened. If we become truly willing to make a place at the table for all, open us to live out what we profess to believe, that our true security is in you and your call to justice and peace, that we are a part of your global family, that because of your incarnation, the human dignity of everyone is sacred, and that we are constantly called to conversion and inclusion. We pray that you help us recognize any forms of racism in our hearts and in our legal systems and social structures. Forgive us our sins of exclusion, heal our souls and spirits, ground us in compassion for all through your grace. Help us take the steps you call us to take to build a more just community, where difference is respected and where we can all join hands and rejoice in our common good. Through the mercy of God we pray. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you.